Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
The other day I did a story about qualified immunity, and somebody responded and said, Steve, you obviously love cops because you're doing a story about cops. When I do a story that mentions cops, you need to pay attention to what happens to the cops in the story and whether or not I say it was right or wrong. So let's see if we can get this one straight. From yahoo.com, Brenda Alexander wrote a story that Tom sent me. Headline, Judge throws out man's guilty plea after body cam footage reveals the officer planting drugs. Okay, so the body cam footage appears to show an officer planting drugs in the cup holder of a car. A Staten Island man is getting a much-deserved second chance after a judge vacated his conviction that resulted from a guilty plea in 2018. Footage from the body camera, worn by an officer in the arrest of Jason Serrano, appears to show the officer planting things in the car that he later says he found in the car. That was in March of 2018, reported by Gothamist WNYC. At the time, Serrano was arrested and charged with possession, resisting arrest, and obstructing governmental administration. Serrano eventually pleaded guilty to the resisting charge 3 months later, and he said he did it because they told him, if you get found guilty of this stuff, you're going to Rikers. You're going to Rikers. Didn't want to go to Rikers. He was unaware of the body camera footage, and his attorneys were also, because the prosecutors didn't share the footage until a few months after the guilty plea. And that's a problem. So we're going to talk about the prosecutors here a little bit and the police a little bit. Again, pay attention to which side I may or may not be taking with this story, but the police don't look good in this story, and neither do the prosecutors. So the fact I'm doing a story about them, which makes them look bad. The two officers who arrested Serrano are named Erickson and Pastran. Their disciplinary records have since become an area of contention, which Gothamist WNYC was the first to make known publicly about these records. The site was able to obtain records through an ongoing Freedom of Information Law campaign, or Freedom of Information Act, which is what the statutes are often known as, but different states have different names for them. But the idea is that you can often get records from the government by requesting them. Sometimes they fight that if the records make them look bad. So the records revealed that Erickson, who is accused of planting the drugs in the cup holder of the car Serrano was in, was disciplined by the NYPD in two separate incidents in 2018. His record shows discrepancies related to situations like this. Prosecutors, however, did not turn Erickson's records over to Serrano's defense team. The judge explained that usually it's difficult to overturn or vacate a guilty plea, but she makes an exception here because this court finds the body-worn camera footage taken with the officer's disciplinary files demonstrates that the defendant may have been searched and seized in violation of his constitutional rights. The judge wrote, accordingly, the defendant's motion to vacate his conviction pursuant to the statute is granted. And you have to understand this. Generally speaking, people go to trial, and if they lose at trial, they get sentenced, and then they get put away if they get locked up for it. You can appeal your conviction by saying that the court made mistakes or so on, but when someone pleads guilty, it's a much harder thing to overturn because you're saying, well, mistakes were made. Yeah, but when you pled guilty, you were saying you did it. So we do know that not everyone who pleads guilty is actually guilty. There's a couple different ways that can happen, one of which is that they threaten you and say, if you're found guilty, something really bad is going to happen. If you plead guilty, you can do this thing over here, which in the grand scheme of things is better than the odds of taking that chance there. And so one of the more common ones you hear about is where somebody says, you're going to get the death penalty in a state that has it. But if you plead guilty to a lesser charge, you'll get prison, and you'll potentially get out somewhere down the road, but you won't get the death penalty. That's one, okay? And so the fact that he pleaded guilty here would make it more difficult to get the conviction vacated. But it's clear, at least the judge appears to be catching this, that the guy pleaded guilty even though he didn't do it, and we know he didn't do it because his body cam footage showing who did do it. So Serrano's legal team is pleased with the judge's decision. Marion Campbell, who's one of his attorneys, said, we're thrilled that the court has finally recognized that Jason Serrano's rights were violated when he was arrested. when evidence was planted, and then when he was prosecuted without disclosure of any of that information. And she is from the Legal Aid Society. The Staten Island District Attorney's Office did not respond to requests for comment, as you might imagine. They previously opposed the request to overturn the conviction, saying that the body cam footage was ambiguous. They said it was ambiguous. But when the court looked at it, apparently the court didn't find it ambiguous. In a separate incident in the same year as Serrano's, Erickson was seen on body camera footage doing a similar action, appearing to plant contraband on a young man during a car stop. The young man was jailed for 2 weeks as a result. The attorney, Campbell, says it's the least they could do regarding clearing Serrano of all charges, and what they should really do, and what might actually restore some faith in the system, is prosecute the 2 police officers involved in this action, Erickson and Pastern. The NYPD did not respond to requests regarding the status of the 2 officers on the force. Pastern is listed as being on extended leave or possibly military leave, and Erickson's name is no longer in the database, indicating that something may have already happened to his status there, but it's unclear. So, what appears to have happened, at least what the court thinks has happened, and what many people involved in the case believe has happened, is a man was pulled over by the police. While they were rooting through his car, a police officer planted something in the car and goes, "Oh, look what I found." So they arrest the man for it, and he is apparently resistant to the idea of being arrested. So they arrest him and charge him with a bunch of things. And they're threatening him that, by the way, when you get found guilty, you're going to Rikers. Now, I've never been to Rikers, but I've heard of it, and it's got a reputation. And so no one wants to go there if they can avoid it. So apparently, they had said, if you plead guilty to this, instead of making us try you for all of this, you won't go to Rikers, and you'll get something lesser. So he pleaded guilty to that. Then somehow someone provides his defense team, oh, by the way, we've got this body cam footage of the arrest, which, when you watch it, appears to show a police officer planting the key piece of evidence in the man's car, which would have been a great thing to have at trial if the case had gone to trial. But of course, if you didn't know that existed, pleading guilty might make sense. But now that the man's pleaded guilty, getting the sentence set aside is much more difficult, but the judge did it. They vacated the sentence, and they vacated the conviction, and so that's no longer there. It's a weird situation, but I'm hoping that people won't think that because I mentioned the prosecutor, that I'm pro-prosecutor, or that I mentioned the cops, I'm pro-cops. These cops doing this, if in fact this is what they did, which the court seems to think they did do, is a very serious thing. They shouldn't be cops. The prosecutor who failed to turn over the evidence to the defense team really needs to have some explaining made on his behalf or her behalf to show why that stuff didn't get turned over. And it's kind of weird because if you're involved in a criminal case and the other side, the prosecution, assuming you're doing defense work, provides you with all of the material they're required to provide you, they often overload you with stuff. They'll often give you banker's boxes filled with stuff. And you go through it and you discover that there's all kinds of stuff that they somehow think is related to this case. But when they do that, you dig through it and you find there's one thing in there that actually blows the whole case up. But the odd part is that in all of the cases that I've studied quite a few of these now. I wouldn't say in all, but most of the cases. The thing they forgot to turn over, almost always, is the most damning piece of exculpatory evidence. That is, the best thing for the defendant is often the thing they forget to turn over. And I can think of other cases off the top of my head where they gave you a banker's box full of stuff and said, there you go, that's all the discovery on this case. And a couple years later, oh, did we forget to turn over the DNA results that said your guy didn't do it? Oh, oversight. Someone in our office screwed up. What can I tell you? What can I tell you? It's funny how that works. It's funny how that works. And so in life, a lot of things that appear to be accidents or coincidence or just oddities often aren't. They often aren't. So when someone makes a mistake in their favor, you have to ask yourself, why'd they do that? When people make mistakes in their favor a lot, you have to go, okay, it's not coincidence, not accident. They're doing it on purpose because it benefits them. So it's a sad situation, but a good result from yahoo.com. Brenda Alexander wrote it. Widely reported, though. Gothamist, WNYC, of course, is the one who broke the story. Tom sent it to me. Judge throws out man's guilty plea after body cam footage reveals NYPD drug planting. There you go. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. If you spend too much time thinking about a thing, you'll never get it done.